Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Just-in-Time Cafe. I'm Tracy Aurora, co-founder of the Just-in-Time Cafe with the Elizabeth Swan, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's webinar. And if you've never been to the cafe, you are in for a treat today because we have a lean legend at the cafe today. I'm very excited to talk about today's webinar. It's called Stop the Insanity, Unplug Your Materials Resource Planning, or MRP system. And guess what? My dear friend and colleague and local San Diego resident, Jerry Wright, is our webinar presenter today. How are you today, Jerry?
I'm doing wonderful, Tracy. I'm glad to be able to join you and Elizabeth.
I'm excited too. I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit about Jerry. He is the founder of Lean Right, Inc. It is an award-winning $1 million consulting company focused on Lean Six Sigma training and operational consulting. And Lead Right, has been awarded the San Diego Business Management Consultant of the Year for 6 straight years, even through COVID. How did you manage to do that? Uh, that's awesome, Jerry. And guess what? Jerry has a brand new book out. It's already a bestseller on the bestsellers list, The Insanity Trap, What Your MRP Consultant Won't Tell You. And so we are very excited to have him. Has so much knowledge. I actually just finished reading the book today, and if you definitely want to pick that book up. It's going to shift your paradigm about MRP systems, and so will this webinar. So before we get started, I'm going to hand over to Jerry in just a moment. But before we get started, a few housekeeping items. You can ask questions at any time by entering them into the chat window. I'll be monitoring the chat for Jerry, and so that we can get your questions answered. This session is going to be available for free on the Just-in-Time Cafe website. We generally post it by Monday of the following week. If you haven't put in the chat window already, please participate in our first activity, which is to tell us where you're from. So you guys have registered from all over the world. We typically get lots of registrations from everywhere. We'd love to know where you are right now. If you have not already, please type in the chat window where you're joining us from for today. So we have Laura from Paris, Tennessee, home of the world's largest fish fry. Thank you for that. I did not know that. Hey, Jennifer Ayers from Portland. Thanks for joining us. We have Marilu from San Jose. We have Tim from Vail. How are you, Tim? Terry from Portland. John from Northern Ireland. Yes. We have Anthony from Chicago. How are you? John from Minneapolis, Marcus from Frankfurt, Germany. And we've got some local people from San Diego, Dan, Chris from Ontario, Canada. We are definitely international, Jerry. Word gets around. You must be a great consultant. I think that they've used you in the past. We also have Andy from San Diego, Kevin from Woodbury, Minnesota. So thank you everybody for joining. I'm very excited. I'm going to tell you just a few more things. So go to the next slide. I just want to talk about our podcast we just did. It's episode number 105. It's with Meg Brown. She's the Vice President of Human Resources at Cambridge Air. This is actually one of my favorite podcasts because we really talked about the successful lean culture from an HR perspective and combining sheet metal with unconditional love as a great culture. So you really want to chime in and listen to that. We also talk about hot apps, the mobile diary. So if you are a journalist, I actually like to journal, but I don't like writing anymore or even typing, but this is a great mobile diary that you can use. We talk about that. We also have Q&A. We ask what is it that makes us constantly try to fit 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag. So check out that episode. It's live now. I mean, don't check it out now, maybe after this webinar. Okay, and just one more thing, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jerry, and that is we've got another webinar coming up October 17th called Lean and Time Studies, Leverage for Engaged Team Performance with Dodd Starboard. If you struggle with creating accurate staffing models or determining realistic performance targets or identifying which processes to prioritize for improvement efforts, then this webinar is for you. There's a comprehensive data-driven answer to all of those challenges. If you've been doing lean for a while and you've likely heard about standard work, but have you measured standard time? In addition to knowing the right way to do a process or activity, it's also really important to know how long that task should take. So you can use that data for staffing models, performance accountability, and targeting processes to invest in improvement. So joins Dodd Starbird, that is the coolest name ever. And he's also the author of The Joy of Lean, as he demonstrates a system and approach that can help your team collect time study data and analyze it and put it to work. So that is Thursday, October 17th, 11 a.m. Be there. All right, let's see. We've got more people that have joined as well. We've got a couple others, and I'm going to hand it over now to you, Jerry, to help us stop the insanity.
You're not pulling your hair out, Tracy. I noticed you've finished the book, so you know not what to do, right? Let's make sure we don't turn on the MRP when we don't need it.
Yes.
All right.
Definitely.
Well, I'm happy to be here. It's exciting. I'm happy to be able to share this. So again, thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Elizabeth, for the invitation. Just real quick, from a standpoint of the agenda, I like to cover this briefly as we've gone through the welcome and background. We still have about 8 minutes left, so that's good news. I'm going to dig in and probably talk for maybe about 33 to 40 minutes, and then we'll make sure that there's time to answer questions if anybody has them at the end. And I believe Elizabeth is feeding those to Tracy, and Tracy will be able to help provide those as needed. So, and a quick shout out to John in Belfast, Ireland. Thanks for staying up late, because I know it's not early there right now. All right, so let me give you guys a little bit of background in terms of material requirements planning. I did some research on this a number of years ago for a large client I was working with, and I thought, I better have a better understanding of why I'm telling them to turn off their MRP. I just taken it on faith based on my experience, for the past 25 years. But I did some digging, and in case you didn't know, MRP, as we talk about it today, material requirements planning, was invented by Joseph Orlicki in 1964. So that was actually the year I was born, so 60 years ago. And he did it for the Polaris program. It was really the first advent of computer use related to material requirements planning. Commercially, it was used by Black & Decker later that year, 1964. When we saw the big transition from nearly 20 years later, Oliver White, not Wright, Oliver White, transformed MRP into MRP2, and that was 1983. He added master scheduling, capacity planning, and other things. So really, when we talk about MRP today, it's really MRP2, but most people just say MRP. That's when the idea of demand planning and forecasting was conceptualized. So this is going back a long time. So MRP's been around for 60 years, and MRP2 has been around for nearly 41 years, so it's a long time. Now, here's what's happened to MRP over time. So if you think of MRP, MRP2, and ERP, which is Enterprise Resource Planning, so that's your Oracle, your SAP, JD Edwards, Microsoft Dynamics, QAD, Sage, and on and on and on. There's a whole bunch of them out there. So by 1975, about 700 companies were using material requirements planning. By 1981, it was estimated that over 8,000 companies worldwide were using MRP. And then by 1989, so just a scant 8 years later, there was close to $1.2 billion worth of sales related to MRP2. So it was significant. Now today, nearly all medium-sized to mega-sized companies are using ERP, which also incorporates MRP2 and demand planning, the current version that we would say people are used to. Now, according to Statistics market research company, the global ERP software market is expected to grow from 34 billion back in 2017, 7 years ago, to 74 billion by the year after this next year. So it's in use in nearly every company on the planet. Even small companies often invest in a simple MRP or ERP solution like NetSuite or something similar to that. Not too many companies are running on Excel and QuickBooks, but there are some, but those are usually pretty tiny companies. So you can imagine the adoption of MRP is widespread. Now, here's the challenge, and this is the part that your MRP consultant and actually people in your own supply chain and often others will not acknowledge, but they're true. So MRP has some serious issues. Data integrity. If your inventory is off, your MRP is going to be off. And I don't know anybody who has perfect inventory. I hear anywhere from 70, 60, 70% accurate inventory to 99%. if they have a good cycle count program. And then here's the other one, bill of materials, a BOM. A BOM is a bill of material. And those BOMs, unless you're constantly updating and making sure they're correct, they're usually off, particularly for things that are like usage-based, like glue or adhesives, or things that have a length, like wire length and so forth. So if your BOM and your inventory are off, your MRP is not going to work correctly. Not to a great extent, but it depends on how bad those accuracies are. Now, here's the other thing that I think even the people in supply chain will acknowledge quickly is that lead times are not fixed. If they say the lead time is 15 days, sometimes it's 12 and sometimes it's 20. So lead times are not fixed. And by the way, usage is not fixed. We don't use the same amount every single day. It varies. So lead time and usage varies, BOM and inventory varies. So you have all these variables, and yet we're trying to forecast the future and get it correct. Now, I'm not saying your MRP doesn't work in terms of doing the math, but the challenge is these serious challenges can't be accommodated by your MRP system. It just doesn't work. The other thing, and this is for bigger companies, if you see inventory in one location, let's say it's in Belfast, Ireland, and you can also see that you want to have it in Indiana, you can't instantaneously move it. There's a lead time to even if you air freight it, it's usually a couple days. So that's the challenge. So really, when you think about it, when you have any garbage going in, it's going to be garbage coming out. GO, garbage in equals garbage out. So here's why MRP doesn't work well. And we've kind of talked about this for many, many years. So I'm going on 24 years talking about this equation. I share this with my classes. I share this with the students at UCSD that Tracy and I taught at and SDSU. So MRP creates purchase order quantities from these areas. It looks at inventory and BOM, which we just said, wow, 98% accurate if you're lucky. Data entry transactions, people make miscounts. So we're back to 98, 99% if you're lucky, if you're good. Forecasts or guesses. Now, this is the tough one. I've polled, I can't tell you how many people, hundreds of people. How's your forecast in general? How good is it? The best I've ever seen is 85%. And that was by a guy who did it all by himself with no help from anyone else. And he was pretty good at it in a reasonably stable market. Most everybody else tells me they're lucky if they can get 70% accurate on their forecast for sales. Okay, 70%. That doesn't sound so bad, but here's the problem. You have to multiply that 70% by all these other things, including actual quantities from the supplier. Suppliers tend to not overship things. They usually short you just slightly. Well, let's say they're right on. Here's what the multiplication tells you. My MRP accuracy for the things I'm buying is going to be 66%. If I'm at 70, if I'm worse, it's going to be lower. So even if I was lucky to get 66%, that means 34% of everything I buy is either too much or I'm shorting myself. And this is just the reality. It's not that your MRP is working incorrectly. So you're putting a guess in there. And we used to call them, back in the day, we called them MRP materials, random predictions. And that's kind of the frustration that people go through. And they say, well, if we could just get better at forecasting. And it's really tough. So one of the things I like to remind people is MRP was originally intended to be a build-to-order system that would use BOMs to make purchasing of complex things easier, like the Polaris program back in 1964. Thousands of parts, let's make it easier. The big issue was if you didn't have a specific order, what would you use to determine how much to build for inventory or build the stock? And somebody said, no problem, we'll just use the sales forecast. Yeah, but that's not going to be right. Yeah, but that's okay. It'll be close enough. No. Talk about the Hindenburg, right? This is just a disaster because it's way off. And companies are constantly renting outside warehouses. They're still having shortages. They have too much of stuff they don't need and not enough of what they do need. So I have a fun little thing to share with you guys. One, don't use MTO application or make to order application for a build the stock business. It's dangerous. You're going to have problems. And we'll have to turn to my old friends Monty Python and the Holy Grail for a quick epic story. Here we go. Let's see if we can get there. All right. If you go and put this on your car, that might be a little too much. Do you guys ever feel that way with the excess inventory? Or how about this one? Dude, you need a heavier donkey. And the donkey's thinking, really? How about less boxes? You feel overwhelmed. And here's the challenge is that you're suffering from forecasting and consequent MRP problems if you constantly expedite materials because you're out of what you need. So if you have this, you've got one of the problems. You have high levels of raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. You could even be in outside warehouses. And then you have higher than normal expedited freight costs. So you can look at your cost numbers and see those. If you have any of these, something's going wrong. So here we are, to my friends, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Pretty crazy. So they were in search of the Holy Grail, a mythical thing. Now, people have said that they found the Holy Grail, and there's like 300 of them around, and they're in different cabinets in different places. So who knows about that? How about the Fountain of Youth? We've always said that's possible. It's out there somewhere. Someone reported that Ponce de Leon found it and lived to be hundreds of years old, but so far I haven't found it. Or how about El Dorado, the lost city of gold? If we could just find that, that would be great. That's the problem, is that we're looking for things like a good forecast. It's legendary, but it's not real. And here's a fun example from my little otter. A good forecast. Please, please, please. You thought you had a good forecast? Yeah, right. So that's the challenge we run into. We're guessing the future and then stymied when we can't figure out why it's not working. Now, I actually looked this up, and I thought this was rather surprising. When you look at the 6 rules for effective forecasting, and I quoted the source here, define a cone of uncertainty, look for the S curve, embrace things that don't fit, hold strong opinions weekly, look back twice as far as you look forward, and know when not to make a forecast. Are you confused just by the titles of this? I was like, what, you got to be kidding me. This is crazy. So again, forecasting is a tough thing. And this is where the insanity trap comes from. And here's my favorite Einstein quote: doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. And that's really what the insanity trap is. We keep trying to guess the future. And now the sad thing is they start saying, well, you know, we have AI influenced or AI integrated models with artificial intelligence, and you'll have that much better guesses of the future. I'm pretty sure that AI doesn't know how to guess the future any better than anyone else does. So again, we need to stop the insanity. Now, I'm not saying unplug your ERP system. That's not what I'm getting at, but at least stop using MRP to place orders to drive production. That's the big push. That's where there's alternatives. And for the diehards out there, I'm going to talk about I'd say a more advanced automated solution that'll get you there without having this challenge, because we don't want to be like this lady here and pulling out her hair. That's not good. So here's what you can do to help improve your MRP. Let's say you're stuck, you have to use it. What are you going to do? Well, you have to cycle count your inventory forever. I mean, that's like you have to dedicate people. It will never stop. You'll always be adjusting and cycle counting your inventory. That's just going to be the way it is. And most companies are expected to do this regardless. Bomb scrubbing. So you have to look at your bombs, make sure they're accurate, and you have to do that forever. And I can tell you as an engineer, I don't like to scrub bombs and look at them and write ECOs to fix bombs. So no one else does. So it almost never happens and people just live with it. You have to scrap report, track your scrap and track improvement forever. You have to track waste. You have to look at receiving, shipping, inventory, counting improvement. So again, barcode scanning helps, but again, physical counting, people still are going to make mistakes. So you can mitigate your MRP challenges, but you can't really completely fix them. Now, the Orlicki Foundation, or the Orlicki MRP, is considered the Bible of MRP. It's on its 4th edition. There's actually one that was just released in January. This is what Orlicki, the people who invented MRP, Joseph Orlicki and his Heritage Foundation, this is what they said. Replenishment. So purchasing, think of purchasing and replenishment, right? The best replenishment practice is replacement using barcode scanning or via a pull system. Think Kanban, pull system, same type of thing. Depending on the complexity of the product, planners can actually order materials using scanning with a min-max system. A min-max system is also a form of Kanban. Think of reorder point, max, min-max, 1-bin, 2-bin system. It's all the same thing. So the people who are the experts at MRP and have written multiple books on the subject say, don't buy with it. And they keep putting in their book, we tell people don't buy with it, but they keep buying with it. And I thought this was an epiphany. The people who invented MRP says don't use it to buy materials. So why is everybody doing that? You know why? Because they can actually sell more software. They can actually tie up, challenges in cash and things like that. So there's a big market out there and a lot of people who don't want you to see that bottom line. They really don't. Like, no, they don't know. We've got AI enhanced versions of forecasting modules. It's the big, I call it one of the big lies out there. So if you think about a push system, and this is the reality on the left-hand side, is demand is estimated or forecasted, orders are launched, and sometimes you get stuff way early and sometimes things come late. Your accuracy is going to be unpredictable. It's inflexible. You don't have a lot of ability to move things other than expedite and de-expedite. There's lots of waiting. There's lots of expediting. And typically inventory turns for businesses running MRP, they're lucky if they get to 3 a year. That's pretty low. Now, on the other side, for Polar Kanban, you have a cross-functional team design a material plan, put things together and say, this is what we're going to build, not with any guessing. So this is the plan based on how we're going to fill up our inventory or meet actual orders if it's a more of a make-to-order business. So the accuracy is very predictable. It's highly flexible. There's no waiting or expediting. And inventory turns typically are greater than 12, or every month you're turning your inventory. That's a big deal. So in push, we're managing by schedule, hot sheets, volcanically hot sheets, lava molten hot sheets for the ones that are really tough. There's material shortage meetings. There's a role that you pay people to do called expediting. In a lean or a pull or a Kanban system, you don't have expedition. It's not even a role you have because it's so rare that people who are doing the normal buying can handle it. Lots of air freight expedited shipments, typically high scrap cost, rework, disposal costs at the end of the year, high-level quality meetings and decisions to determine what we're going to throw away, frequently delays, and it's complex. We're on the pull side, as many people know. Low scrap cost, rework problems are resolved typically in line or by the operators themselves, much more on-time shipments, and it's simpler. And that's why most of the automotive companies, including Toyota, as we all know, they do pull, they don't do push. It's not going to work. Speaking of Toyota, Taiichi Ono, who's a co-founder of the Toyota production system, much of the tools and the collection we talk about related to lean, he said the more inventory a company has, the less likely they will have what they need. And isn't that a weird oxymoron? You're like, wait a minute, I have too much inventory, yet I still have shortages. And that's exactly what so many people in the MRP world experience. So we'd like to help them out. Let's get away from that. It's not serving our purposes. Now, Kanban, if you're uninitiated, I'm imagining many people on the call are, but Kanban basically just means signboard or billboard, or for our purposes, we'll say it's visual signal. And here's an example of a simple one here is a visual signal, like a little card. It has a part number, it describes what it is, who supplies it, how many there are in each Kanban card, and how many cards there are. And then if you find the card on the floor, give it back to the stockroom so they know what to do with it. And these can be little simple laminated cards or much larger sheets. It depends on what you'd like to do. But that's what Kanban is, visual signal. Now, Tracy, I'm hoping you can help me out. I have the balder version of you on this one. Is that okay? Here you are. There's Tracy. I need to add the hair for the next time. So Tracy's going to go get a box of Part X. Okay, great. So now I see I need to order some more Part X. I only have one box left. Let's say it was hair product, right? Maybe hairspray or something fun like that. So I've got this empty space and it says I need to go ahead and call or email the supplier and says, hey, send me some more hairspray or Part X. And now I follow first in, first out. So I push that forward. Ideally, if you have a flow rack where it can just roll forward, that's ideal. When the vendor delivers it, say in the next few days, we put a label on it, and then that process just repeats and repeats and repeats. And now, what if nobody takes any Part X? That's our maximum inventory commitment. I don't have a trailer somewhere with more Part X or an extra secret stash in the back of Part X. I just have this. So my inventory exposure is minimized, and I have high turns, which is really what we want out of Kanban. Now, some say, oh, Kanban's too simple. It shouldn't work. That's too simplistic. Well, there actually is some sophistication to Kanban in terms of how we determine the number of bins. Now, the reality is material supply variability, like what you see in the chart here, is there's going to be variability, lead time, usage, all that's going to vary. And you can see a distribution, a normal distribution off to the right. Well, when we want to pick a service level factor, we often say, well, I don't want to run out of parts, but I also can't afford, a massive amount of inventory. So people don't typically go with a 3-bin system. If you notice the 3-bin system, it's almost a 99.8% service level factor, or SLA. But a 98%, so just above 97.5, is 2 bins. 2 bins get you close to 98% service level. And here's the Z table it's based upon. So We usually just make things simple rather than using 1.96 or if we want to do 99, 2.33 or something like that. We say, let's just go with 2 bins and we'll use a safety factor of 50% to account for that variability. It usually gives an amazing service level without having to be overcommitted in terms of dollars in inventory. So there is some statistical significance to the 2 bins that a lot of people overlook. Because you say, well, it's just 2, it's 1 and 2, no big deal, it's simple. Yeah, but simple is good. People like simple. Now, the Kanban quantity that I've used for nearly a quarter of a century now is this one. 1 Kanban is equal my daily usage times my lead time to replenishment in days. That can be from a supplier or internal, doesn't matter, times that safety factor. And I always start off with 1.5. If for some reason you have a supplier, we had an example of a supplier that was across the street. They held inventory for us and they delivered daily. Well, we just turned that safety factor to 1.1 and it was totally fine. But in general, I always start with 1.5 until you have some experience. And ideally, you'd be looking at your Kanban bins or your Kanban sizes about every 3 to 6 months. So either quarterly or semi-annually, depending on variability. It's good to look in and say, hey, how are we doing? Is everything okay? And when I talk about Kanban, I usually mean 1 card or 1 bin at the point of use being consumed in either 1 card or 1 bin that's either in stock or is being restocked or reordered. So we don't have excess amounts. We typically have a couple bins when we start off, and then after time it changes. And a lot of people say, well, that's too much inventory. I said, well, no, not really, because think about it. In steady state, I don't have 2 full bins. I also don't have just 1 bin. I have somewhere between those because we're either always pulling something, ordering it, it's being received, or over time it changes. Typically, the amount of Kanban we'd see over time, and I'll cover this in a second too, is about 1.25 bins to maybe 1.4. So figure about 1 1/3 bins is a good steady state safety level that you're going to see in terms of inventory total in the end. So when we talk about Kanban, just in general, MRP is flawed. So we're going to go to Kanban, or we're going to go to a better version of MRP, which I'll discuss as an alternative. Kanban's visual signal, the rule is 2 Kanban cards or 2 bins or 2 pallets or 2 shelves or 2 spaces, but I have a min and a max, or I have a reorder point and a maximum. That's always how it works. The safety factor is always 1.5. If you find a bin or a card or whatever, give it to purchasing or inventory control. And then if your Kanban bin is empty, fill it up. I mean, it's that simple. And people say, well, it's too simple, it can't work. Well, yeah, it does work. And I'll show you a couple examples. So when I had my first exposure to lean and continuous improvement from the way we talk about it today, it was at DJO Global. I worked there for about 16 years up in Carlsbad and Vista, California. Made the knee braces that you see during football season. So when you think of the athletes in college and even the pros, if you see a knee brace on or even an elbow brace, it's probably one that was made at the Vista Manufacturing Center here in the San Diego area. So in the beginning, we wanted to get rid of MRP. We had a nice lady named Mary who actually ran the MRP. So we called MRP back then Mary's Random Predictions because it was always a challenge. Every weekend they would run the MRP, and on Monday we'd look at the schedule, and by Monday afternoon it was incorrect. We had 9 people doing production planning, running the MRP, doing expediting, scheduling, all that kind of stuff. It was insane. Every day we'd take 2 hours to review the MRP and the green bar printout of the shortages to figure out what we were going to build. Too often we couldn't complete the builds because we had material shortages, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or 50 a day. Not a week, not a month, but 40 or 50 a day. We had really huge freight expediting bills and we had to do something about it. Well, we had this wonderful guy named Bill Holbrook. And Bill Holbrook, he's since passed, God rest his soul, but Bill kind of went in and said, we're going to unplug MRP. And he was kind of damned if he did or damned if he didn't, because we had to make a choice. But MRP at DJO did not go down without a fight. IT and finance and accounting literally had a cow. And I've got my little cow logo here just for that. They really were frustrated because, hey, look, we've spent this money on this huge, ERP thing we just installed a couple of years ago. And then they thought the operations people were crazy, but we've been secretly setting up a Kanban system on the side. And we just one day said, we unplugged the MRP, and then I'll show you the results. So we'd set up a 3 Kanban card system, and that was a mistake. We got rid of the third one. right away because we found it was just too much space, too much inventory. We had so many, shortages. It was going to be one of those issues that our customers were frustrated. We needed to convince the company we had to unplug the MRP. So we installed the Kanban in around August or September of 2000. And then that's the raw material daily shortages. You can see the trend. So from 40 or 50 a day to often zero, maybe one or two. That was the typical thing. And those could be managed pretty easily for special items. But this was actual data from, looks like 2000 to 2003. And that's the reality of unplugging the MRP. Now, this is what our Kanban trend looked like in terms of number of items on Kanban. We never got to 100%. There were just some things that were one-offs. They didn't have significant volume. We never put them on Kanban. They were just a purchase rec and we buy an estimated amount. But the vast majority, so 90% or so, we put onto Kanban, and that made a big difference. And our raw material inventory turns, you can see kind of the 2003 up to 2004. We really started pushing a lot to get rid of excess material and really driving the turns up. So I only have this time frame from days gone by, but it was a huge improvement. And I'll show you one last example that kind of brings it all home. So this is the Pentagon Kanban we used. We showed this on many, many tours for years at DJO. People would come by and look at it. And Jorge Ramos, who's right there, was managing that at the time. And it was just a simple visual card system. So if you haven't looked at it already, look up it before when we were running MRP to after when we were fully on Kanban, fully on pull and mature and steady state. We went from 40 million in raw materials down to 6 million. We went from 3 turns a year to 24 turns a year. We were turning inventory basically every 2 weeks. We had 2 full outside warehouses to 0. 46 was the average daily part shortage, just typically 1 or less. 9 people were managing raw materials, expediting, things like that. We fortunately were able to repurpose and have people do different jobs. So it was basically Jorge and a buyer planner managed all of it. We had 5 different systems to manage raw materials. We got down to 2. So this is a long term. So this is years, several years, like 4 or 5 years. We had an 85% improvement overall when you look at these key metrics. So pretty phenomenal change. And it was all on this, okay, we're going to unplug MRP. Well, what are you guys going to do? Well, we're going to do Kanban. And it was amazing that we got the results we did. But if it was an isolated incident, I'd say, okay, well, we were lucky. We had some good things going on, but it wasn't. I've got a couple more examples, and actually I have many more examples, but I'll share just a couple.
Jerry, really quickly,
Yeah.
there's a question. Why was the device 5-sided from someone in the chat window?
Yeah, so we did a Pentagon. It was 5-sided because we had this week, next week, 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, and the max was typically 4 weeks out. We didn't have 4 weeks plus, so we just picked 5 sides. It could have been 4 likely. I think after we got pretty steady, we realized we probably could have made it with 4, but we actually have a print and a drawing. If anybody wants to build one, I'd be happy to send them the prints we have for how you can build your own Kanban out of wood and time card racks.
Okay, and then one other question, Jerry. What happened to all those production planners? Because everybody's always afraid. Well, Lean's not supposed to be about getting rid of people. So what happened to them?
Now, we actually moved them into other roles. If they weren't going to be in purchasing or procurement or buying and planning, they went on to different roles within the company. Some people actually said, no, I want to keep doing the MRP thing and bang my head against the wall, and they went to work somewhere else. But in general, most of the people were repositioned and had other opportunities to take. The buyer planner side, we had different parts of the business. So making a buyer planner transition was easy, but for the expediters, they became people who would run the Kanban system or manage inventory rather than spending their time expediting. Because we actually eliminated the expediter pay grade or payroll. It just was eliminated, and we moved those people into different roles. All right, so we had another location up in Minnesota making electronic medical devices. So it was called EMPI at the time. This was and this was several years, of course. This was their investment adjustment. So from 38 million to 12.5, raw turns from 2.5 up to 18, outside warehouses from 3 outside warehouses down to 0, and daily part shortages. They weren't quite as bad as we were at the time. And then they had the same adjustment, people going to manage raw and things like that, and then systems. So The thing that was funny about this particular site is that you would go into the warehouse, and that warehouse, all the aisles were filled with inventory, let alone the racks. In order to get to something, you had to unload the aisle of all these different pallets to get to something, and then you had to put them all back because there was no space. And they had trailers in the parking lot and 3 other outside warehouses. So it was pretty much insanity. And they kept living this until they made the transition. And the transition didn't take like 2 months. It took like 2 years. But once it was finished, 75% overall improvement from before and after. And then these are some of the quotes I put them in here. Sherry was the inventory distribution manager. Vicky was in charge of OpEx and Lean. And I won't read through them, but essentially, Sherry's like, wait a minute, we're going to turn off our advanced computer system. We're going to go to laminated cards. How is this a good idea? And yet once we got there, she's like, oh my gosh, I have my life back. I'm not working 12 hours a day and taking work home on the weekend. So it was pretty amazing. And Rhonda, who's this next quote, Rhonda actually became the purchasing supervisor, and she's a huge Kanban proponent, but she'd never heard of it before getting involved in this. She was hired to start doing buying and planning, and we started doing the training and talking about Kanban. And Rhonda still to this day is a huge proponent of Kanban, and they continue to run the same system in that facility. It's changed hands. It's got a different name, but they still run Kanban, and it works really well.
Hey, Jerry.
Yes.
Richard wants to know, did 2-bin work for all materials, or did that mean only 2? And does that mean 2 Kanban cards per item?
Yeah, it's typically 2 cards or 2 bins. It could be a tote, it could be a pallet, it could be a rack position, but usually there's the minimum amount I need to sustain me while I'm waiting for the other one to come in, and then maybe one I'm currently using, but it's typically always 2. I don't like going to 3 bin, 7 bin, 12 bin, whatever. Some automotive places use multiple bins. You can have multiple bins, but you have to be very careful about what they represent. Otherwise, it can get confusing. So we try to keep it simple. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you.
And then one last example. This is for a power transformer company. They made the ones that go up on the power poles and down subterranean under the ground. They're in Athens, Georgia. Same type of thing. I've got some quotes from them as well. This is a huge plant, almost 700,000 square feet, over 8,000 unique raw material part numbers. When we started this, they had done kind of a quasi Kanban MRP type of thing. They went from 12 million to 7 million. Inventory turns went from 8 to 15, so doubled. And this was just in a 1-year period, so it wasn't over several years. It was just a 1-year period. But we had basically 12 part shortages per day and a bunch of systems to do this. Now, my favorite little commentary from this is a Westinghouse transformer factory. It was built in 1958. And until the year following the implementation of our site-wide Kanban, they had had at least a few shortages every day ever since it had been opened. And in February of 2015, a year after we'd finished the Kanban setup, there was the first day in 57 years that there were 0 shortages. And then that same feat was repeated over 15 times in the following 2 months. Now, there was a guy that actually, he was almost 70 years old. He had started there when he was like 18 or 19 years old. And he goes, yeah, I've been here ever since then, and we've never had a day without a shortage because I'm always dealing with them. And today was the first day in my entire career, which spans nearly 60 years. And I'm, wow, happy to say there was no shortages. So it was pretty cool. Some of the different quotes, and again, I won't read through these, but Wesley was a big help in getting things going, as well as Cammie and Rebecca. We all worked together on this to change the lives of the people dealing with material shortages. And I can tell you that was the primary reason, Tracy, that I wrote the book, is I saw so many people suffering on 12-hour days, taking work home on the weekends, working Saturdays, not spending time with their family because they were just fighting, expediting, and shortages and issues. And when I saw the before at this plant and saw the after at the same plant with the same people, I'm going, wow, I mean, what an epiphany for all of them, going, wait a minute, this is simple and manual, and I got time to work on improvements now. So, I mean, that was kind of the fodder for me to say, let's get the word out there. I'm not interested in selling books. I'm really interested in people changing the way they deal with things. So some quick Kanban lessons learned, and then we'll be able to go into questions in about 4 or 5 minutes. When you get to steady state operation, as I mentioned before, it's about 1.25 to 1.33 bins. It's almost rarely ever 2 full bins unless you have, very low usage or it's the first time you've stocked things. So you're not looking at 2 full Kanban bins as your inventory commitment. It's more like 1.25 steady state. Inventory turns typically triple or quadruple after steady state's been achieved. And that's assuming WIP, raw and finished goods are reduced via returns, usage, discard, or donation. If you have to write stuff off, it's a little ugly. Typical WIP, raw and finished good inventory levels are usually dropped by 30 to 40% when you get away from MRP and move to Kanban. So not only do you have better service, you have a lower cash investment to get there. It's not uncommon to have to rework your initial Kanban system. Sometimes people don't like the cards or it didn't work right. And I always recommend pilot it one place first and make sure it works fine before you do the whole enterprise. Just get one area done at a time, and then you can roll it out more broadly because you need to learn as you go through this. And then the thought process for your experienced buyers and planners has to be transformed, and old habits often die hard, but they need to be replaced by habits of, hey, we're not doing forecasts. We're not going to run MRP. We're going to plan for the future, but we're not going to buy based on guessing. And everybody's QOL goes way up. That's quality of life. That's a big deal, not only at work, but at home, because you have more time to spend at home. Now, I promised earlier, and again, I am not an expert on demand-driven MRP, but there is a sophisticated electronic version. It's essentially MRP, but uses Kanban supermarkets throughout the system rather than using forecasts to drive things. Things are being driven off usage in demand-driven MRP. If you want to find out more about demand-driven MRP, the Demand-Driven Institute, and I have the little logo at the bottom, they have books out there. There's a lot of stuff. I've actually talked to a group that did use this. They've been using it for 15 years, and they say it works amazingly well because it doesn't rely on the guessing. So if you're stuck with wanting to do MRP, see if you can adapt to the demand-driven version that works very well from everyone I'm told that uses it. So my last favorite Einstein quote, we cannot solve the problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So MRP has to go, and we have to think about doing it differently. It's very important. All right, so I think I finished in reasonable time. I want you to make sure you stop the insanity and figure out a way to turn off your MRP, or at least figure out how to not buy with it. And we're on to questions.
All right. Sounds great. Do we want to do the raffle first?
Sure. I have a book right here.
Because, questions might take longer. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat window and we will get Jerry to answer them. I have a few questions for him to answer as well, but we're going to go ahead and do a random raffle. So Jerry, pick a number between 1 and 25.
17.
17. Okay, hold on. And the winner of your book is Lennart Frankel.
Cool.
Woo-hoo. So Lennart, if you can direct message me your address or at least your email so that we can reach out to you, and we will get that book sent over to you.
And I will sign it. So say how you want it signed.
All right. Yay. Okay, great. So if you have any questions, okay, so we have one from Tim. How do you determine the Kanban level with high variation use products, something we regularly see in healthcare?
It's the same thing. The formula works whether it's high variation or low variation, Tim. It's still that 1.5 safety factor, and the replenishment lead time is still the correct thing to use. And I've used it in high volume, low volume, one-off, aerospace, medical device, hospitals, clinics, you name it, and it always works.
So why is it that the variation isn't a factor? Because it's not part of the formula, right?
You have to look at your history to decide the quantities. So what's your usage over time? I like to usually look at least 1 year of usage and see what the spikes are. And in some cases, you may have to carry slightly more because you have high variability. But if you don't do that, you're going to come up with shortages. So you have to look at the usage and then figure out what it's going to be. And if you have very spiky usage, you're going to probably have to have larger Kanban bins, but that's what the data will tell you when you calculate it.
Okay, great. So how long has demand-driven MRP been available?
I think
You know?
15 to 20 years. So I'll back up. They're on version 3, and that was just released, I think, last year. So I want to say it's like 15 to 20 years it's out there, but it's something you have to have someone show you how to implement it within your existing ERP system. So it's not typically included in your existing ERP. It's something you have to add in or adapt.
Okay. Jerry, you mentioned the history, a little bit of history of MRP, but I guess my question is, if it works so badly for some things, why are people so bought into it? How is it selling billions a year? It's sort of like Microsoft Office.
Mhm. Yeah, but actually Microsoft Office works. No, I mean, I think the thing is that people don't know of the alternatives, or they say, well, we have so much complexity. We have so many part numbers. We need to use a computer program because doing a manual Kanban system isn't going to work. Well, but there's good news. Oracle has a Kanban module. SAP has a Kanban module. All the big companies out there, they all have Kanban already. It's just some people aren't willing to make the transition and turn it on. And I think there's a lot of entrenched, I guess, like, hey, I've known MRP. I know what to do with MRP. I know how to live. It's like the devil I know versus the devil I don't know. And so I just stick with it. And like I said before, it's not just a few companies. It's, thousands, millions of companies are using MRP, and they're just not doing it right. And I still don't understand why they're not following the recommendation of the experts, but that's not uncommon in your experience, is it?
No, it isn't. And, I was also thinking, it's sort of like when you talk about lean culture, and then we do tours so that people can kind of go to a different place and
Yeah.
get an idea of what that is. And maybe that's something to help people make the transition, is going to a company that actually went from MRP to Kanban.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
they'd help. What,
And also, Tracy, people
yes.
go with what they know, even if what they know isn't right. They go with what they know.
Yes, we have a couple more questions. Have you
Sure.
worked with companies who have a short shelf life items, and how do you incorporate this into Kanban calculations?
It's still the same. It's lead time times daily usage times the safety factor of 1.5. Have 2 bins, and it doesn't matter if it's high volume, low volume, limited volume, super high volume, super variable. It works every time.
Okay. And are you aware of any Kanban module in healthcare, like in Epic is a system that a lot of healthcare companies use?
Yeah, so Epic is an electronic medical records system. I'm actually pretty familiar with it. Epic does not provide for any kind of Kanban because Epic is managing healthcare and patient records and scripts and prescriptions and all that, but not inventory that I know of.
Okay. Dan has a question. What are your thoughts and recommendations on using Kanban on R&D builds?
If you can, it's nice to use them. The biggest problem with R&D builds is that the future is unknown. You don't know what you're going to need to make. If you have an idea of what your forecast is, and there's some level of what builds you're going to be doing for validations, for either submission for 510Ks or other things, you can set up a Kanban if it makes sense, if it's going to last for a while. But if it's a short-term thing, like say less than a few months, it's probably not worth the effort. You can get by without it. But if you're going to have a build that goes 6 months to a year, then it'd probably be worth the time to set up the Kanban, or you're going to have constant shortages.
Okay. Also, I read your book, like I said. It doesn't show up in here, but
No.
I read your book, and you had mentioned that sometimes a good way to start the transition from MRP to Kanban is to pick a department
Yeah, or a
versus trying to
single
convert the
area.
whole company. So
Yeah.
tell us more about that, and how long does it take typically to do one department? I know there's a lot of variation there, but just give us an idea.
Sure. So I usually pick one production area or one cell or one line or something. The example I'll share with you is one we did, the very first one we did at Power Partners, a transformer company. We had paper, the liner paper that would go on the inside of transformers as an insulator. And that paper was set up, and they had all the different part numbers, and yet they had shortages, like 8 or 9 shortages every day. And when I went to investigate it, because the CEO said, hey, let's use this as a pilot or something. Let's prove the concepts there. I said, okay, well, where's the vendor? How far away are they? Go, they're in the building. I went, what? Oh, so the vendor that supplied the paper actually had their own slitting and rolling or converting operation in the lease space within the building where they were providing the materials. Now, you got to be kidding me. And there's still 8 to 9 shortages a day. Well, when we found out, we looked at it, there wasn't a good signal. There wasn't a good definition of what the Kanban was supposed to be. It was very loose. So we set it up. It took about 2 months to set it up. And we went from 8 or 9 shortages every day to 0. And I asked, the last time I had looked at it, it had gone for 5 years with 0 shortages per day. And it's all because we just changed the system, set it up, made it visual, trained everybody on how it worked. And the problem was solved in less than 2 months. And that was over, so it's brought maybe 50 to 70 part numbers. Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, pick one area maybe where you're either struggling or there's some consistency, set it up, learn what you learn, and then go to the next one. And then, like I said, at Power Partners, 700,000 square feet, 8,000 part numbers. It took us about a year to get all the Kanbans done. And that was with a team of about 7 or 8 people.
Wow. So, okay. So clearly, I mean, your book, a lot of the book is about how to convince leadership, right? Like why you need to move and make the change. But once people decide, yes, okay, we want to do this, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you run into from an implementation perspective?
It's usually people who say it won't work. That's not going to work, or it doesn't make sense, or it's too simplistic, or we're different. The big we're different comment comes up a lot. And I'm like, well, why don't you just try it and then see what you find out? And usually when they try it, they go, it actually works. I haven't known of anybody that puts it in place correctly and never had it not work, ever.
Yeah.
And it's in 25 years of doing this, I've never had it not work.
And what I mean, it just kind of blows me away that like people resist so strongly. I mean, it shouldn't surprise me because of what we do.
Yeah, of course. But you know what? For the people who are hung up and say, no, I need to keep using the system, well, then look at the demand-driven MRP. So you're still utilizing your system. You have to pay for it and install it and use it. It's not free, but that would allow people to do less, manual calculations and have a company help them get started. That's another way to go, which I think if you have a highly complex business with a lot of dollars, maybe that's the way you want to go. But it would be way better than buying to guessing, which is wrong.
Good. Yes. Okay, good. We got one more from, I want to say Faisal. I'm sorry if I butchered your name there. Thanks for the session, Jerry, Tracy, and Elizabeth. Please share your thoughts on high mix, low volume product line, and is it advisable to still practice the 2-bin Kanban?
Yes. Yeah. Anything that has any reasonable volume, meaning I use a expression, we have runners that you run pretty much every day or every week. Then there's repeaters, which you may run once a week or a couple times a month. Those are the ones that would fit. The ones that don't fit are strangers, ones that you hardly ever make, or they're made once in a while, or they're special. Those should be make to order. But anything with the high volume or something you're building every day or every week or every couple weeks, those make sense to put on Kanban.
Okay, let's see. Gosh, I mean, is anyone are you getting any kickbacks from Kanbans? Just kidding, Jerry.
No, I don't even have any investment in like the Acro Bin company or something. I probably should, but I don't.
So once, we just went to Radius Labs. We did a lean learning tour there, and they had an entire Kanban system for all of their parts. So the manual calculation, that might probably seem overwhelming to people, I would assume, like trying to figure out what the manual calculation is for every single part. So what do you suggest to streamline that?
You can put the formula into Excel, and as long as you have reliable data for your actual usage, the safety factor of 1.5, and then your lead times. The lead times need to be pretty realistic, not whatever they just said, but what they actually are. Once you put those in, you can do the calculation. Then you just have to make adjustments to the correct pallet or box or package quantity so you don't give weird things. You don't want to have them ship you a pallet with one box taped to the top. Just get a single pallet size because we have that 50% safety factor to help us adjust. So That's the easiest way to go. Most people do it in Excel.
Okay, great. Okay, is there any more questions? Do you have anything else you'd like to share with our audience, Jerry, that comes to mind?
No, nothing at this time, but thanks for asking, Tracy. Thanks for having me. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Great. And are you still consulting? Because it sounds like somebody might, if they want to employ your services, are you still available to help as a
I'm
consultant?
still available and probably at least through next year.
Okay, I know
And
you've been
then
threatening to
maybe,
retire.
then maybe end of 2025, I'll be eligible for Social Security by then. So you never know. Could happen.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry. It was a pleasure having you at the cafe. You know, we mean that from the heart. And we need to go hang out and have a coffee, a real coffee in person soon. So thank you so much for coming. A wealth of knowledge. And your book also is full of knowledge about, and really all things process improvement, not just this particular thing. So thank you so much, Jerry, for coming to the cafe. And go ahead and get out there and get the book, The Insanity Trap by Jerry Wright. It's available on Amazon. And there's also Kindle versions as well. Thanks for coming today, everybody. Have a wonderful Thursday, and we will see you next month.
Thank you. Thanks, Tracy.
Sure.